Hey everybody, I'm Anjanette Levy, and thanks so much for coming to my channel. Please do me a really big favor. Hit that like button, the thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell so you get notifications. And I'm going to be doing a video today about the Sean Combs trial. I updated you last weekend on what's been going on. Well, this week, it's been another crazy week. We are in the middle of week 4. The week began with the testimony of Mia, one of the witnesses who is an alleged victim in this case, and she's being allowed to testify, or she was allowed to testify using a pseudonym. Mia is not her real name. Some content creators are in a little bit of trouble in the courtroom for doxing her, for saying her real name. I won't be doing that. So they won't be allowed in the courtroom anymore. But Mia's cross-examination, just let me tell you, got pretty crazy. She was grilled and grilled and grilled and grilled by Brian Steele, who represented Young Thug pretty successfully down in Atlanta. He got Young Thug a really good result. Just grilled and grilled and grilled over and over again about her social media posts and them praising Sean Combs, talking about what a great guy he is. Mia said that she was sexually assaulted by Sean Combs on multiple occasions. And so this cross-examination was tough. And a lot of people that I talked to who were in the courtroom said that it was very effective. And I actually spoke to one guy. His name is Mel Smith. And I interviewed him for Long Crime for my podcast, Crime Fix. And he told me basically that there were at least 5 or 6 jurors who seemed to really believe what Brian Steele was saying, that she was being discredited, that Mia was being discredited by Brian Steele. So the prosecutors were not happy with the nature of the cross-examination. She did make it through, Mia did, and left the stand after 4 days on the stand. So it was quite a grilling. This week, we're also expected to hear from Jane, another woman who's allowed to testify using a pseudonym. And Jane dated Sean Combs starting in 2020 and dated him all the way up until 2024, apparently. She was a single mother, apparently fell head over heels in love with Sean Combs, participated in freak-offs with him, was madly in love with him and apparently enjoyed these freak-offs the first couple of times she tried it, but then things really went south. And she, according to the government, felt pressured to take part in these freak-offs. Now, Sean Combs faces 5 federal charges. They're racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking, and that is by use of force, fraud, or coercion, and also transportation to engage in prostitution. So I think they've got him on possibly that last one, of course, because sex workers were hired and transported, flown all over the place to take part in these things, as was Cassie Ventura and maybe some other people. So they may have him on that one, but Sean Combs, he vehemently denies all of these charges. He says he is not guilty, and he says he has never, ever, I want to be clear, he says he has never sex trafficked or sexually assaulted anybody. He says any sex he had with anybody involved in this case or anybody else was consensual. So that's what his lawyers have said. Now, Jane is coming up this week, and so that testimony is supposed to be very compelling. Jane sounds like she wants nothing to do with this case. As I mentioned, she was a single mother, so we should be hearing from her very, very soon. Somebody we did hear from, though, just recently is a woman named Bryana. Bongolan. She's a fashion designer, a really good friend of Cassie Ventura's, and we've heard her come up previously in the trial. Her nickname is Bana. And so Carrie Morgan, one of Cassie Ventura's former best friends, had talked about Bana before and talked about how Bana would often give drugs to Cassie Ventura. She would buy drugs and sell them to Cassie Ventura or give them to Cassie Ventura. That was discussed quite a bit on her direct examination. And before Bana even started testifying, Bana was given an immunity deal because she's admitting to, on the stand, selling drugs. That is a crime. Providing somebody with drugs. So Bana was given an immunity deal and granted immunity by the judge. And one of the things about immunity, it can be kind of dangerous because yes, you're given immunity, but you have to tell the truth. And guess who determines what the truth is? The prosecutors. So the prosecutors, if they think you're not telling the truth, they can later bring you up on charges of perjury or what have you. So Bana gets up there on the stand and she is questioned about her relationship with Cassie Ventura and how she knew Cassie Ventura. And one of the things she was asked about right off the bat was an incident involving Sean Combs and whether or not, she knew Sean Combs. Yes, she knew Sean Combs. She knew him through Cassie Ventura. She doesn't sound like a big Sean Combs fan and didn't sound like she was much of a Sean Combs fan back when she first met him or before she had even met him, because she knew Cassie was dating him. And she felt like there were times when Cassie would get off the phone with Sean Combs and she was either upset or she knew she had been with Sean Combs and she would see something like a black eye. So she was kind of like, I'm not so sure about this guy. So Bana is asked about an incident involving Sean Combs and her at Cassie Ventura's apartment in Los Angeles years back. And basically she says that she's about 5'1" or so. Sean Combs around 5'10", 5'11", somewhere in there. She said that Cassie was in the bedroom of her apartment. And she said that, Sean Combs comes in and picks her up by the armpits. Can you imagine? And like dangles her over the balcony of this apartment building. And he's yelling at her about something that she did. I know what you did or whatever. And she's like, has no idea what he's talking about. And then throws her on this like outdoor patio furniture, balcony furniture, or what have you. And so she said she got a bruise on the back of her leg. As a result of this, she says she has suffered some pretty serious trauma, and that could be important. She says she's had nightmares, wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, things like that. There was another witness that testified to something similar to this, like screaming in the middle of the night and stuff like that. It was Mia, basically from trauma suffered by things that Sean Combs had done. And this will be important because a lot of the charges that they talk about in this case, especially with the racketeering, some of the things they talk about is whether or not, serious harm was caused. They talk about that with like the forced labor predicate of the racketeering charge. They talk about that with some other charge, whether or not serious. Bana told another story in which she was on a beach with Cassie Ventura at some type of shoot. And Sean Combs came up to her at one point in time and said, I am the devil, I can kill you. And she didn't really know what was going on with that at that time either. Then she talked about another instance in which she saw Sean Combs throw a knife at Cassie Ventura. She said that Cassie Ventura threw the knife back at Sean Combs. It did not hit Sean Combs, but then Sean Combs left. So there was a lot of discussion about things that she had witnessed and violence and things like that. Now she considers, Bana does, Cassie one of her really good friends. It also came out that Bana had hired this attorney, Tyrone Blackburn, who's been kind of a controversial figure in all of this. He's represented some other people who filed lawsuits, including Little Rod, the music producer. And so she said that she sued Sean Combs for $10 million over that whole balcony incident. Now, Bana was questioned about the drugs that they would use together, she and Cassie. And she said they had done ketamine together. They had used some Vicodin, cocaine, ecstasy, all of these different things. And she also described Cocoa Puffs. And apparently Cocoa Puffs are kind of like a blunt. And it's a blunt. And that's where you take like marijuana. And she said, then you would sprinkle cocaine on top of it and wrap it up and you smoke it. Like a blunt is like marijuana wrapped up pretty thickly. You roll it up in rolling papers. And she said it kind of like gives you that weed feeling, but then it also kind of gives you kind of a sharper feeling as well because of the cocaine. Then she was asked on cross-examination a number of questions. And Nicole Westmoreland, who's a pretty good lawyer, is the one doing the cross-examination. And she's going to continue that on Thursday morning. And there were a number of times where Bana said she couldn't remember certain things or, I don't remember. I can't remember. Well, of course, Sean Combs's team is loving that because they want to be able to say that Bana is not a reliable witness or that she's super chummy with Cassie. And Cassie, they said in their opening statement that this was all about money, jealousy, love, all of these different things. They're going to say, are they coordinating stories? Yes. They're going to say that they kind of reconnected around the same time that Cassie had filed that civil lawsuit. Another interesting point, Bana said that Cassie wanted to use her name in her civil lawsuit. And Cassie, Bana was like, no, she didn't want any part of this. She didn't want her name in that lawsuit at all. So that's pretty interesting too. Now, Nicole Westmoreland also asked Bana about some other people she was friends with. She already admitted, yes, I'm still friends with Cassie. Well, remember Deontay Nash, the stylist who testified for the government, and he testified to witnessing abuse and, helping out Cassie, hiding out in hotels with her and stuff like that. Essentially trying to get her away from Sean Combs when he was in, an irate mood or whatever. Well, apparently she is still friends with Deontay Nash, and she had spoken to him recently. And recently, after his testimony, she was asked when was the last time she spoke with Deontay Nash. And she said, I want to say after he got off the stand. And she said, like, not directly after, but around then. And she was asked, all right, you guys didn't talk about his testimony? And she said, no. She was asked, just avoided that subject. And she said, yeah, we knew, what was going on. So apparently they knew they weren't supposed to talk about their testimony, according to what this is sounding like. Nicole Westmoreland then asked Bana about talking with Cassie, around the time she filed that civil lawsuit against Sean Combs back in November 2023. Remember, this is a very important civil lawsuit because this civil lawsuit, it opens this entire can of worms, this whole federal investigation into Sean Combs. This was the roadmap for this investigation. There were a lot of rumblings that, oh, the feds have been looking at Sean Combs for years. They've been wanting to get their hooks into Sean Combs for a long time. Well, if they hadn't had anything to get him on, as some people like to speculate and say that they did want to get him on something, this was what they used to bring him up on charges. And so she was asked, did you talk to Cassie about her lawsuit? And she said yes. And she said she read it, and she talked about hiring Tyrone Blackburn, and then she hired another lawyer. And she was asked, what was the purpose of hiring these lawyers to sue Mr. Combs, right? And she said it was to seek justice. And she was asked to clarify it was what? And she said to seek justice. And she was asked, and your definition of seeking justice was to sue Mr. Combs, right? And Bana said, could you explain that further? And then Nicole Westmoreland asked, you hired lawyers to sue Mr. Combs. Isn't that true? She said, I did hire a lawyer. And she said, to sue Mr. Combs. And she said, yeah, to sue Mr. Combs. And she said, like Cassie did, true. And she said, for different intentions, I would say, but yes. And then she said, I'll get to that. Now, as I mentioned, this cross-examination is not over. It will continue on Thursday. But I am telling you, from what I heard from people who were in the courtroom, people who watched the jury, I am hearing that Sean Combs's lawyers think this went pretty well for them. It was pretty devastating to listen to Bana talk about all of this stuff, about being dangled over the balcony, about Sean Combs throwing a knife at Cassie, about being thrown on furniture and all of this stuff and the drug use. But from what I'm hearing from people who were watching the jury in the courtroom during the cross-examination, the jury was kind of like, pulling away from the prosecution's point of view on this witness, or at least that was the body language, what the feeling was. Of course, on redirect, they always will rehabilitate their witnesses or seek to. So it will be very interesting to see how the rest of this unfolds on Thursday. So Bana talks about, under cross-examination, how she hired a lawyer in January of 2024. Remember, Cassie's lawsuit was in November of 2023. It was settled the very next day for $20 million. Sean Combs settled that, or at least Bad Boy Records did, for $20 million. Bana is then questioned about how she had conversations with Cassie about the balcony incident and whether or not it really happened at Cassie's apartment or whether or not it happened at a hotel. And there was a discussion about whether or not, oh, you have to Cassie, you have a balcony. You had a balcony at your apartment, right? Stuff like that. So it sounded like there were discussions about this story, and the suggestion by the defense is that possibly these stories were coordinated. So apparently, this all came out, it must have, during questioning by federal prosecutors who are taking notes when they interview witnesses for a trial. So it's pretty crazy. It'll be interesting to see if they can tidy this up on redirect. So after Bana is done testifying, They expect another witness, Enrique Santos, who is a personality with iHeartMedia and also a Miami Reserve police officer, to testify. And then we should get to Jane. And Jane is expected to be on the stand for many, many days, even though, she was with Sean Combs 4 years. Cassie was with him for 11, and she was on the stand for several days. But Jane, 4 years, and she is going to be on the stand maybe for 5 days. That's a really long time. So remember, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I'll be covering some other cases, maybe doing some videos like this. Remember to like and subscribe, hit the bell. I'm Anjanette Levy. I'll see you back here next time.